And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another victorious episode of the Assembly Call, as today the Indiana Hoosiers escape the barn, Williams Arena, with a 70-63 hard-fought victory. Look, I tweeted at the very end of this game, whew. And that's really all you can say after this one. The Hoosiers avoided disaster. They get a win. They're third on the road in the Big Ten season, and a place that we've lost two straight games. The last two times we've played at Williams Arena, we all have nightmares about this place. We got past it. We no longer have to worry about this game on the schedule, and at the end of the day, the Hoosiers are 5-0. It wasn't pretty, but it was a victory, and on the road in the Big Ten, that's all that matters. I'm your host, Jared Morris. On today's episode of the Assembly Call, I will be joined, as always, by my co-hosts Andy Bottoms, Ryan Phillips, and Will DeWitt. And we will break down this Indiana basketball game for you over the next hour. The good, the bad, and the officiating, which I think probably goes somewhere after bad. But we'll get to that. So let's open up, as we always do, going around the horn. I will start with today's banner moment. And for me, the banner moment came at the end of this game. I mean, look, I said at halftime when it was tied 34-34 that I thought Indiana would come out in the second half based on how they played at the end of the first half and really put their foot on the throat of Minnesota, a young team that wanted to wilt. Like, you know, this is a team that has really struggled and has gotten blown out and hasn't been able to stay in games. They don't have much confidence. And I thought Indiana would come out, go on a run, and still be able to make this a 15, 20-point victory. And Indiana had chances at the start of the second half, but they couldn't capitalize on them. And then every time they got it up to an 8-point lead in the second half, Minnesota would come right back with a 5-0 run or a 3-0 run, and they would just stay within arm's length. And what that led to is a game where the Hoosiers only led 62-57 going into the final 4 minutes, and now you're in a dogfight in a tough arena against a team that hasn't done much this year, but that is fighting and scratching and clawing, and credit to Minnesota for doing that. But it was 64-60, and, you know, the Hoosiers have been scrambling a bit on offense, but they had a really good defensive possession. It ended with Yogi getting a steal, going to the other end, taking a wide open layup, taking a wide open lane to go in for the layup. The Hoosiers led 66-60, and the game was on ice at that point. Because, again, it's 64-60. Minnesota's got the ball. There's a couple minutes left. They get a bucket, and now it's anybody's game. But Yogi would not let that happen. And on a day when Yogi passed the great Quinn Buckner for second all-time in assists, that's the guy that we have to start out the show with. And the banner moment is having a senior point guard like Yogi Ferrell who can do senior things at the end of games to help you win a game like this where things aren't going your way, you're getting dominated in free throws, you're a little bit out of sorts, but your senior steps up. And Yogi did not shoot well, but I thought for the most part he played well. And despite going 6 of 17 from the field, he had 20 points, he had 7 assists, 6 rebounds, 2 steals, only 1 turnover, made a couple of big free throws late, and Yogi Ferrell was the reason that we won this game. And so to me, a big hat tip to Yogi. Somehow the voters for the Wooden Award left him off of the 25 finalists. That is ridiculous. If you don't think Yogi is one of the top 25 players in America, you don't know anything. So excellent performance by Yogi, stepping up, getting his team a victory, and I tip my cap to you, Yogi. You are the banner moment for today's game. All right, let's go around the horn. Ryan, we're going to save your rant for a little bit later because I know people are here to listen to it. So, Andy, let's start with you, your bottoms line on this IU victory.
I mean, to be honest, I was tempted to go with Yogi because I think his performance was just that good, and I probably still will. A couple other quick guys to point out, and you know, one of the things I think we've lamented at times in some of these recent years is the lack of upperclassmen and how important that is. And when you look down the list of guys who played really well today, while they all didn't start their career at IU, you know, with Zaislov coming in the way he did in the first half and hitting those threes, Bielfeldt played really well. Colin Hartman made some nice plays, a couple good driving layups late, and you know, so it goes to show the importance of veterans and going into some of these arenas. But I really thought Yogi was just phenomenal, particularly after the break. It was, you know, a case where Crean, usually I was waiting for him to take him out, you know, right before one of the TV timeouts, just to, you know, kind of like normal, give him a little bit of a break. And you know, the foul trouble on Robert Johnson was part of it, but I think the bigger thing was the way the game flow was going. Even though IU played well during a stretch when Yogi was out in the first half, I don't think Crean, and I agree with him in this, they just couldn't afford to take him out. So if his legs were a little bit tired on a couple of the jumpers, I think that was something that you had to be willing to live with based on the way the game was going, and left him out there. And he made a handful of great plays, the steal and layup at the end that you mentioned, a few minutes before that, kind of hanging back and then coming out of nowhere on the inbounds play, hustle play in the first half where he ran from the other side of the floor to chase down a rebound and throw it off of somebody else. I just, we can talk about how important the lack of turnovers were because that's been such an issue, but I just thought even leading from an effort standpoint was really huge for him today. I just thought he was outstanding. So I know that the Wooden finalist, I don't believe that's final. I think you can get added to these watch lists and stuff like that, but anybody who didn't put him on there looked dumb before today and looks incredibly so after his performance today.
You know, Ryan, sometimes we come on these shows after a victory, and you don't always have something to rant about. I think maybe you do today. What do you think?
Yeah, well, we all know I have a hate-hate relationship with Big Ten officials, and today was absurd. I mean, it was just stupid how bad the officiating was. Minnesota took 30 free throws. Indiana took 12. And most of those came late in the game when Minnesota was purposely fouling. I think it was something. I think Minnesota had 8, where Indiana had 8 free throws before the end there. Indiana was called for 22 fouls. Minnesota was called for 17, and I think 4 of those came in the last 2 minutes for Minnesota. So I mean, you're looking at such a wide disparity, and there was just so much contact in this game. And then you get all this contact and crazy stuff, and that's fine if you don't call in the ticky-tack stuff. And then you just saw constantly way away from the ball, guys would bump into each other and, foul. I mean, there needs to be some consistency, and this league, it's become a joke. It really has over the years. How bad, and it goes both ways a lot. I thought in the Ohio State game there were bad calls both ways. I thought Ohio State got screwed on a few. It wasn't a close game, so it didn't really matter. But, I mean, it's not like it's just people going after Indiana. There are bad foul calls all over this league constantly. And I'm sorry, a 30-12 free throw advantage, that changes a game. You want to say the officials don't affect a game. Well, it changes the flow of the game, changes how guys play. You have to take out players for long stretches of time if they get too many fouls, and it just makes no sense. And it's at the point where you feel like, honestly, if it doesn't affect the bottom line of how much the league is making, nobody's going to make a change. There needs to be a change. I remember I came on here a couple years ago, and I said, look, if guys were this bad at their job in the Middle Ages, they'd be hanged from the city walls as an example to others. It's a deterrent from doing your job that poorly. And you know what? I'm not that far off from wanting that to happen, quite frankly. It's just awful, and it ruins watching games. I mean, I wanted to have a nice little Saturday watching a basketball game, and I find myself screaming at the television because it's absurd. It is awful, and it needs to change, and somebody needs to do something about this. I hate coming on here after a win and being negative, but my God, something needs to change.
Will, please note the timestamp of Ryan's best moment ever on the assembly call so we can put it on the highlight show at the end of the year. Bravo, Ryan. Bravo. Will, your stat of the game.
Yeah, I'm just going to add on here to some of Ryan's points. Out of our 12 free throw attempts, we made 10 of them. Out of the 30 for Minnesota, they only made 19. So I'm pretty glad they missed 11 of those, or else this game would have been a lot closer than it would have been. And just giving some more insight of what Ryan was talking about the difference between the two teams. Well, the free throw rate for IU was 19%, and it was 65.2% for Minnesota. So that's quite, like Ryan said, a game changer. But luckily for fans, I do have a bonus stat of the game. Indiana only had 9.4% of turnovers in the second half. That was only 3 turnovers, which was much better than the first, in which they had 10 turnovers for a 27% turnover percentage.
Yeah, and what's most impressive about that, Will, is Indiana came out in the first 3 minutes of the second half, turned it over 3 times. So they were at 13 turnovers already. Indiana didn't turn it over again for the rest of the game. And, I mean, that was remarkable. I tweeted about that about 4 minutes, with about 4 minutes left in the game, and thought for sure that I would jinx everything. But the Hoosiers,
that was a gutsy move to throw that out there.
Hey, I hashtagged it no jinx. So in the future, if you don't want to jinx yourself, just hashtag it no jinx and you're okay. Because look, I mean, on a game when Indiana's offense wasn't great, 1.01 points per possession, they needed every single one of those possessions, and not turning it over was huge. And again, you look at what this team can do when it doesn't turn the ball over. In Luke Wynn's latest power rankings on SI.com, he looked at offenses in the country, their point per possession on possessions when they don't turn it over. Guess who is number one? Your Indiana Hoosiers. And it proved itself today in that second half. Indiana need all of those possessions in a tough 7-point victory, on the road, and they got it. So a great job by Indiana with the turnovers. All right, we are going to jump into some Nick Zeisloff talk here in just a second, because while he was quiet in the second half, he roared loudly in the first half when Indiana really needed him, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, as well as break down the rest of this game. First, a quick reminder to make sure you're on our email list, assemblycall.com/subscribe. You can go enter your email address right there, or you can text INDIANA, Indiana, to 44144. Then all you have to do is reply with your email address. You'll be on our email list, and it means that you will get each and every one of our post-game emails. We only send it to subscribers. It comes out the morning after the game. My analysis, Andy's analysis, Will's stat of the game. So make sure that you get on that email list, because we want you to get that. It's one of the best ways to connect with the show and get all of our extra analysis. So again, text Indiana to 44144 or go to assemblycall.com/subscribe. All right, well, you are listening to the Assembly Call IU postgame show. We want to welcome everybody who is listening on the Sports Buzz in Louisville. We appreciate you guys listening in, and to everybody who's watching live, and to all of you who are listening on the podcast. It's a varied audience that we have now, but we're very happy to have all of you, and we're happy to be speaking on this victorious Saturday afternoon as the Hoosiers escape the barn with a 70-63 victory. And Ryan, let's talk real quick about Nick Zeisloft. We talked about Yogi, who was great in the second half. But frankly, where would Indiana have been in the first half without Nick Zeisloft? This is a game Minnesota jumps out to the 8-2 lead. They're really in control. And then Zeisloft goes off. And look, he'd been in a big slump. He missed his first two. And I'm good once a year for a really prophetic tweet. Last year, it was before the IU-Maryland game, predicting that win and Yogi's point total. Today, it was saying after Zeisloft's two missed three-pointers, which, he looked off, like his feet were off, his release was off. He just needs to get one where his feet are set, just shoot it straight, it'll go in, and then the floodgates are going to open. Sure enough, he got one, made it. He hunted a shot on the next one, as a good shooter's going to do after they finally make one. He drained it. He hit two more in a row, including one where he's about to fall out of bounds. And credit to Tom Crean for sticking with his guy and letting him shoot through it, because you knew Zeisloft would get going, and you know that when a shooter's in a slump, they make that first one, they stop thinking about it and let the muscle memory take over. And I don't know that we've ever had a greater example of that than we saw today from Nick Zeisloft, who was huge in the first half, and now hopefully he can continue that because Indiana needs him. What did you see from Zeisloft today?
Yeah, I mean, the 15 points were gigantic for Indiana. I mean, honestly, that was a huge contribution, because a couple of the other big-name guys weren't really contributing. I mean, Troy Williams had 7. Hartman had 4. I thought his 4 points were very important, but he wasn't scoring a lot. Robert Johnson only had 2, and Thomas Bryant had 10. But you got Zeisloft filling in with 15. And yeah, I mean, for those 4 threes in a row he made, it was Kobe Zeisloft. I mean, the one he was falling out of bounds. There's no way on earth anyone thought he should take that shot, and he just drained it. Falling out of bounds, falling to his right, just nails it. And you notice in the second half, Minnesota had to put a good defender on him and play him as tight as possible. That opens up the floor and spacing for everybody else. That, gives the offense more room to move. So even when he's not hitting a 3 in the second half, he's affecting the defense and basically taking one help defender out of the play. That gives guys like Yogi more driving lanes. That opens up the floor for everybody else, makes it easier to make a post feed to Bryant or Bielfeldt. So it really impacts the entire defense. And so that first half was incredibly important. And you're right, it's great. We talked about it with Mark Titus last week. Eventually he's going to see 2 go down, and he's going to get on a roll. And you felt like that was coming. You didn't know when, and you were praying it was today, because it was such a back and forth tough game for a while. but he definitely put Indiana on his back for a stretch there, and that was really impressive. I mean, he would just, and they were all perfect too. You know, these weren't shots that rattled home or that, you know, kind of went off the backboard and back in and, you know, whatever. These were perfectly drained shots, and he was just feeling it. And that heat check falling out of bounds, that should be on the end of the year highlight tape. That was fantastic. It was so great. I did not see that coming, but yeah, I thought Zaislav had a great game, and hopefully that'll lead. And he really didn't play that many minutes, you know, and he poured in 15 points. He was in there late defensively too. He was subbing in for Troy Williams defensively, and played pretty well. So I think that yeah, overall great game for him. Hopefully he carries it over. And the barn is not an easy place to shoot because, you know, one of the rims is like 9'6" or something like that, and the other one is probably like 10'4". But yeah, he was hitting his shots, and hopefully he'll continue to do so. We need him, especially with Blackman out.
I'm sorry, did you say Kobe Zeisloft? I just want to confirm.
Yeah, Kobe Zeisloft.
Okay.
Hey, you know what? That was such the falling out of bounds. Kobe's the only dude who I'm okay with taking that shot, and
Jay Edwards. It, so. Jay Edwards also.
Well, okay, yeah, we'll give you that. Give you that.
All right, Will.
All right, Jared. Well, I just want to point out that you weren't the only one to have a tweet about Nick, and then something just kind of strange happened. Right before he got hot, I actually tweeted out his stats of his struggles, and I said he's been struggling at Big Ten play, including today. He is now 4 for 27 from three-point range, which is only 14.8%. 2 minutes later, he hit those back-to-back threes. And then within like the next 5 minutes, like I said, 4 for 4. So between you and I, we got some good voodoo going for Zeisloft there.
Yeah, but let's stop patting ourselves on the back. All credit to Zeisloft for, you know, as Brian said in our chat, good shooters need to have short memories, and he did. What I really liked about Zeisloft is he missed those first two, and then he passed up a couple of other opportunities for, you know, there's shots that you'd be okay with Zeisloft taking, but his feet weren't set. I think he knew that he needed to get one where everything was in line. He waited for the perfect one, got it, and then boom, floodgates open, and it was great to see. So, okay, we've been very happy, very jovial. We got a win at the barn. That's all well and good. Yogi was great. Zeisloft was exciting, and there's some other, you know, plaudits to hand out. You know, OG had another great OG play with the steal and dunk that, you know, extended Indiana's lead to 4, and it never got below that again. So there's some other positives, but there's obviously a lot that goes wrong when you play against the 200th ranked team in KenPom, against the 261st ranked defense, and your offense only gets just above a point per possession. And Andy, let's talk about a couple of the guys who I thought really struggled today, and that's Troy Williams and Robert Johnson. Now, Troy did lead the team with 8 rebounds, did have a couple of big blocks, but I thought for most of the game seemed a little bit out of sorts, and I thought, you know, his worst play actually came on defense there late when Indiana was up 6 right after the play I mentioned where Yogi, you know, put us up 66-60, and there was a defensive switch, and you can see Colin Hartman yelling and pointing at Troy to guard King, and Troy is late getting over there. King has a wide open 3. That right after that, Ryan, is when Coach subbed Zeisloft in for Troy, and when Troy's being subbed out for Nick Zeisloft for D late in the game, I mean, Troy's your best athlete, and he's out for defense. Zeisloft's in. You know, you don't want that. Troy a little out of sorts on offense, and Robert Johnson, you know, only 2 points. Did have 3 assists, 4 rebounds, but then 3 turnovers to go with it, a lot of fouls. So clearly his better game against Ohio State didn't signal a complete turnaround for Robert Johnson. Let's talk about those two guys, Andy, and their struggles and how much that then leads to Indiana really struggling as they did today.
Well, I'll tackle Robert Johnson first. I mean, I thought, and there was another game, I can't remember which one it was, that early fouls really took him out of the flow of the game, and I thought that happened today. I mean, he did come back in the first half and was able to get through the remainder of the half without picking up a third foul, but he definitely was a bit less aggressive, and you know, some of the good things that we saw from him. You know, he had a couple nice, you know, dishes on drives to the basket, but in general, he didn't do that as much. I just thought the early fouls really took him out of any kind of rhythm of the game. But he did play some solid defense, and you know, the turnovers were a concern, but was able to step up and hit those couple free throws at the end. So a few positives, but I thought the foul trouble was really what did him in. Troy was, I mean, I don't really at this point, like I don't really know what we can say that we haven't said already. There was the one sequence in the first half that I said was just quintessential Troy Williams. Gets going out of control to one side, flips the ball back, terrible turnover, on offense, and then comes back down, makes up for it, blocks a shot on the other end, then runs end to end and has a just crazy putback dunk where it's like, yeah, this is pretty much what you've come to expect at this point. And I just thought what struck me on a couple times with the turnovers that he had was he seemed to drive into traffic. There was the one he got an offensive foul in the second half where, I mean, the guy is set up, but he had room to try to go around him, and he just seemed like he just dribbled straight toward him and tried to go through him. And then there was another one in the first half where I think somebody had set a screen, and it seemed like he had an opening if he had used his left hand and tried to get to the basket. But he cut back the other way and used his right hand and just kind of dribbled into traffic. And I thought, those couple things today, he got taken out early in the game because he was a little bit out of control and settled for a three early on and a couple other tough shots, and Crean took him out, but it didn't really seem to phase him a great deal. And he didn't get taken out after a couple of those plays in the second half. I think the one sequence I mentioned, they had somebody at the scorer's table ready to come in for him, but after that, I think he's like, well, you leave him out there. He just made a couple good plays, and so I think that was a struggle to see him do that. But he did hit the one big three in the corner where he did have a chance to get his feet set, and it was more within the flow of the offense. So I just thought it was a pretty uneven game from him, and Minnesota really was packing people into the lane, which limits a lot of what Troy can really do well in a half-court offensive setting. So he struggled to adjust to that, being able to really figure things out. They packed it in so much he couldn't really get much going on the baseline, and so definitely a struggle for those guys. I think probably different causes for that, but hopefully just a blip based on the way the game played out today. In Robert Johnson's case with the fouls, and in Troy's case just the way that Minnesota approached IU defensively.
Hey, and Andy, what do you make of Thomas Bryant's performance? He 10.7 boards, which, for a freshman on the road, a solid outing. He was 5 of 7 down low, so he was his usual efficient self. But Indiana really seemed to struggle to get him the ball, and it really looked like Minnesota was committed to him not getting the ball very easily. A lot of times, collapsing down on him, not making the entry pass is very easy. And I thought for the most part, Thomas did a pretty good job of not getting frustrated on offense, allowing some of his offense to come from a couple of offensive rebounds and getting putbacks. But he did have 4 turnovers, so not the great game that we've seen from him. And then he didn't play the final 7 minutes, which I think a lot of us thought was odd. And he did, he only had 2 fouls. Do you have any guess why he might not have played, and just what do you think of his performance overall?
Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, the only thing that I can think of, and the one thing that I kind of worry about watching him play is that he's just so into every call, and I think it's partly just he's just an emotional guy. I think the thing that you worry about is you don't want him getting a reputation of some of that. And I mean, that one play where he went down, I think he did get hit. They didn't really have a camera angle that showed that very well. I think he did get hit. I think he played it up quite a bit. And I think with him, it's like you don't want him to get that reputation because then you just become a magnet for drawing fouls like that and some of those kinds of things. So I thought in cases when he just played and didn't get hung up on that, he did really well. He had the big dunk on the baseline where he, made a spin move, tiptoed around somebody and was able to do that. Had some good work on the glass. And I thought when he got the ball inside, did pretty well. But I do think he let some of the contact and things like that disrupt him a bit more, and I honestly don't know at the end of the game whether it was questions on defense, although I think we would all agree he's gotten better on some of those pick and roll situations and ball screens. I think he's done better with that, and Bielfeldt ended up giving up a basket in pretty much the same way that Bryant did at some point late in the game. So I don't know if it was just kind of him trying to keep him from letting his emotions get the best of him, but I certainly thought he had played well enough to warrant being on the floor, especially with just the rebounding presence that he gave. Minnesota was continuing to really try to go inside to be able to have him in there. I was surprised that he didn't get back in at some point. I felt like he got taken out to kind of settle him down a little bit, but maybe Crean just felt things were going well enough he didn't want to put him back in. I was definitely surprised by that.
Yeah, it was pretty clear early on that offensively Bryant was really affected by the contact he was taking in the post, and he wasn't able to, sometimes he was able to finish through it, but even just getting position, he was really just getting bumped around, getting pushed around, and then when he'd go back on defense, it felt like he was getting called, or somebody on Indiana was getting called for the same thing, and you could see him getting frustrated, and that's a freshman reaction to that kind of thing. You're working hard to get position. You're working hard to, get a basket, get in the post, and to not get helped out by a call, when a guy is all over you, it's going to frustrate you, and that's something he has to mature past. It's the foul calls are going to be what they are. I think they're terrible. We know my feelings on it, but when you're a player on the floor, you've got to play through that, and you can't let it get you riled up and take you out of your game and make it so the frustration mounts with every call. I thought late in the game he didn't play because I thought Bielfeldt was playing better defensively. I think Bryant overhedged on a lot of those ball screens when Minnesota was trying to run a pick and roll. I think Bielfeldt did it once, but I think as Andy noted, he gave up a basket the same way. But I think for the most part, he played much better, solid defense, and was using his feet much better. And I thought he had a really good game. I think we were gonna probably aim to talk about him next. 10 points, 4 rebounds, a steal, a block, a turnover. A couple of those rebounds were huge. And I think that he's just been he keeps being the guy that has surprised us so much. I call him better than advertised Bielfeldt for a reason. He is playing as well as we could possibly have hoped. And I think that, after games where Bryant really stepped up and he didn't do much the last couple weeks, he's really always ready to fill that role as soon as he comes off the bench. He's not a guy who doesn't play well or doesn't play much for a couple weeks or for a couple games and then is, out of sorts. He's ready to go. So I really love what he brings to the team, and I think everybody does. I think every fan is starting to recognize what he brings. The interns talked about him on their midweek intern show. They talked about him for a while and just how good he's been and how much of a pleasant surprise he's been.
Yeah, he was Josh's pick to click, in fact. Andy, you wanted to make a point on Max.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when we talk about Max and Thomas, because I feel like they're kind of like the yin and the yang. When you talk about Bryant being, kind of bordering on overly emotional at times and can really kind of get moving really fast. Bielfeldt to me is just like the steady guy, and part of that is just he gets the ball in the post. He's not in a hurry. He's making little moves and head fakes and pivoting and things like that. So I do think they kind of balance each other out well. And I think in addition, I would agree with Ryan's point on defense. Just in addition, I think he's just a steady player at that point, and it's interesting to kind of contrast how those two go about their business on the court.
Yeah, Bielfeldt is very methodical in everything he does. He's just sort of, he's exactly where you expect him to be. He does the same thing all the time. He's very steady, and you're right. Brian is very up and down emotionally and with his play and all that stuff. So I completely agree. Bielfeldt is very, just always on the same level whenever he's on the floor.
He's the perfect balance for the freshman, the experienced senior who's steady. And here's the thing, let's not forget, it was a really rough start for Indiana. Again, Minnesota jumps out to the 8-2 lead. Indiana missed their first 7 shots, couldn't buy a bucket. Things you expect to happen at the barn if you've watched this team play over the past, 3 decades, like a lot of us have. And Max came in and scored Indiana's first 4 points. It was kind of a great sandwich game for Max. He came in, really provided a boost off the bench. And then, again, played a lot at the end and provided a nice boost there. And I thought it was interesting, Andy, when you kind of look at some of the lineup decisions that were made, we've seen OG a lot of times be the first guy in off the bench, and today it was Zeisloft and Bielfeldt were the first 2 guys in off the bench. And, they delivered, just a wonderful performance. 25 points combined, 6 boards combined, the solid defense from Bielfeldt that we talked about. Juwan Morgan had kind of a quiet day. I thought OG had a pretty quiet day, but, had that big splash play. And, in fact, he had a couple of big steals. And what's great about OG's steals is they almost always lead to points. The one steal that he had that he took to the other end, and there was a great play in the first half. When was that in the first half? I'm trying to find it in my notes here, but OG got a steal, I think, slapped the ball away. Yogi got it. Bielfeldt ran the floor, got a bucket. It was great to see. And let's just talk real quick, Andy, just about the bench in general. And, when you talk about these games on the road, these tough games on the road in these weird environments, And even though these aren't against great teams, again, you're just trying to avoid disaster. We saw it in the Rutgers game how big the bench was. We saw it in the Nebraska game how big the bench was with OG playing so well. And here again, the bench steps up, and 2 of your top 3 scorers are bench guys. OG has some big plays. I mean, number one, the bench has been big, but number two, and again, you can look at, OG sitting for a while in the second half. Why was he out after he made that big steal? Those kind of things. But I feel like, to me, especially here in Big Ten play, I've had a lot fewer questions about Tom Crean's kind of substitution patterns, his use of the bench. I feel like he's got maybe a better feel for this team and this bench, certainly than he had at any point last year. Do you get that same sense?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that about who was the first one off the bench today, because I thought the same thing when that happened. When they, I turned around and they said, "Oh, come on, are you making a substitution or somebody off the bench?" I looked up and expected it to be OG, quite honestly, and not only for the fact that he's been that way the last few games, but also just kind of the energy he tends to bring. And definitely with those guys, I mean, Bielfeldt and Zeisloft had probably 2/3 of the points between the two of them in the first half, I think, and overall the bench had, I think, more points than the starters. So it was, I do start to get that sense, and you're waiting for one of those comments, which I usually think are garbage, where it's like, oh, we have this, this number of like starters, or we don't have just 5 starters, we have all this other stuff. But I'm starting to feel like on this team it might actually be right. And I don't think Crean's actually come out and said that, but I usually, when I hear coaches say stuff like that, I just kind of roll my eyes and question that. But I do think we're seeing and have seen so much in early Big Ten play how it has been different guys being able to step up in different situations, and the same lineup that might work in one game isn't playing as much in another, but being able to put some of these combinations of guys together. You saw some bigger lineups today, and I think with Blackman out, you're going to have to, unfortunately. I mean, there's a scenario where Robert Johnson gets in foul trouble again like he did. You don't really have a ton of choice. You can certainly play Zeisloft, but I don't think can play 18 minutes a half, and so there were times they had 4 guys taller than 6'6" on the court with Yogi, and so I think we'll probably see more of that mixed in here and there. But I do think he's made some really good moves of putting in the right guys in the right situations, and the results speak for that, because it really has been, Yogi's been a constant for sure during Big Ten play. But I think if you went back and said, who are my top couple players in a few of these other games, there may not be too many guys whose names would show up more than once as you went through and did that. And I think that kind of balance is important, something that's really been lacking in these last couple of years. So I definitely agree. As much as I'm typically one to kind of get on Crean about some of the substitutions, it felt like for the most part today he pushed the right buttons.
And by the way, Andy's substitution analysis is one of the elements of our email newsletter that comes out the day after every game. So again, text 44144, or text Indiana to 44144 so you can get on that list. Ryan, I want to ask you a question while we're on the subject of Tom Crean, because this is something that was coming up in our chat earlier. It's something that comes up every now and then, especially in games like today, where you're kind of on the road, you feel like maybe you're not getting calls, that kind of thing, is that I literally can't remember the last time Tom Crean got a technical foul. And I'm not saying that technical fouls are some sign of great coaching, but I do feel, certainly with our history as a program, we know of coaches who will use the technical foul to make their point, and who are maybe among the best ever at getting on, some would say, intimidating referees. And we certainly don't seem to have that with this coach. Or do we? I don't know. You and I were kind of going back and forth about this in the chat earlier, and I know people in our chat at assemblycall.com/live were going over it. What do you say to folks who wonder if Crean is working the refs enough, especially in a game like today?
I say it's unless you're sitting on the floor, unless you're sitting on the bench, unless you're right behind the bench, it's really hard to know what's being said. I mean, you get limited exposure on a broadcast to what's actually going on. So it's just really hard to tell. I know people want to jump all over that and stuff, and they see Crean on the sideline, not necessarily yelling at the officials or not up in their face or whatever. Well, you're getting a snapshot. You're not getting necessarily the flow of the game. I don't know if he works the officials enough. I really don't, because I'm not there. I'm not sitting there listening to it. He could be talking to them constantly for all I know, or he could be silent to them. So, I mean, it's really hard to know. I think people want to jump on something to blame. They want to find blame with a lot of stuff he does or doesn't do. So, I don't know what goes on, and I don't think anybody does unless you're sitting on the bench or behind it. You don't really hear what's going on. You don't hear the words being exchanged. I know he's gotten into it with officials before, but I don't know if that's a constant thing, and I don't know if that's a game by game thing. In the post game, in his post game comments today, he is talking about. He doesn't want to mention. They said, did the foul difference make a difference, and he said, I don't really want to get into that, and that's, I think that's as diplomatically as you can handle it. Clearly I did not handle it that well earlier on this show, but you don't know what's going on unless you're there, and trying to go by what you're seeing on the broadcast is foolish, because you're not seeing everything. You're getting quick little snapshots. So I don't know what's going on. I don't think anybody does unless you're there. So it's something to look out for, I guess, but really not something to get upset out at unless you're there and know what's going on.
By the way, this is maybe the high point in these post-game chats that we have going at assemblycall.com/live. Brian says, I got a technical foul as a fan at a high school game this year. Well, I yelled and the coach got the T. Officials are dumb. So that's Assembly Call, where the audience members get technical fouls as fans at games, because that's how passionate you all are, and that's how passionate we are. Real quick, I do want to let everybody know, as we do typically at this point in the show every time, that the Assembly Call is a listener-supported show. We really do rely on your support and greatly appreciate your support to run the chat, to maintain our email list, all the costs associated with the show. Plus, it helps us for trips that we're going to take. For instance, the meetup that we're going to have on January 30th. In Bloomington. All of us will be there. We'll be at the game. We're going to be doing a little get-together at Yogi's after the game. That's another game against Minnesota. So the interns will be hosting the show. We'll be there in town. And it's made it so much easier for us to plan this trip and make this trip happen, that you all have been so supportive of us. And either donating to the show directly or purchasing one of our Assembly Call coasters at assemblycall.com/gear. We really appreciate it. So if you are interested in becoming a patron of the Assembly Call and supporting us, you can go to assemblycall.com/support. There are plenty of options there for ways that you can support us, and we really, really, really appreciate all of you who do. So thank you if you have. Thank you even if you've considered it. And if it's something you want to do, go to assemblycall.com/support. All right, well, the Hoosiers survived 70-63 today. I am Jared Morris. This is the Assembly Call IU postgame show. We appreciate you listening. And, Andy, I want to ask you a question, because you are obviously our authority on bracketology. Your first bracket came out earlier this week. And folks, if you go to assemblycall.com/bracketology, you can always get Andy's most recent bracket. And Andy's not just some scrub who does bracketology. According to Bracket Matrix, who ranks every bracketologist in the world, really in the universe, Andy is ranked #1. Hey, it's fair to say universe, Andy's ranked #1, so he knows this stuff. So here's my question for you, Andy. Obviously coming into this game, it's a game Indiana's favored by 12, 13 points. Ken Pom predicts them to win by 12. Minnesota's terrible. They're winless. They're getting blown out by people left and right. And Indiana comes in and they only win by 7. Does that matter at all? And the fact that Indiana, only beat Rutgers by single digits, it's a road win, but does it matter at all, the style points, or at the end of the day when you're stacking resumes, is it just simply that you avoided the disaster loss?
I mean, from my perspective, I think it's just more that you avoided that. I think there are cases when the margin of victory can come into play, but I think it's more if there's a large pattern of it where, it could be either way, right? I mean, if you're beating every team by 25, and then you lose a game maybe you shouldn't lose. Well, it's like, well, you just had an off night, but you've also beat these other teams, countless times by a wide margin. So I don't think it's anything to worry about. I think if anything we've learned over the last few weeks of watching college basketball, it's that life on the road and conference play is tough no matter who you're playing. And so while Minnesota has looked really bad in a number of these games, a number of these losses, I think Crimson Quarry pointed out they only beat Michigan State only beat them by 8 up there as well. And I think that was a game without Denzel Valentine, so you can, put an asterisk by that one if you want. But I think there will be games when they play other teams well. I don't expect them to win a lot of conference games, but I don't know that it's a huge deal. Quite honestly, the bigger deal for IU right now is just being able to beat, play and ideally beat good teams. Zach Osterman had a good write-up on that sometime in the last couple of days in the Star, and just kind of had talked to some other bracketologists about that part of it. And so while it's good to win, and the RPI likes road wins and all those kinds of things, I mean, they're definitely getting to a point where you got to start to stack some some good wins. So while winning all these games in a row is certainly great and isn't discounted, the challenge of the Big Ten schedule for IU at this point is twofold. One, most of the good games are toward the back half of it, and two, the way that they only play some of the projected top teams was once thought to be a blessing and is now not really a curse per se, but certainly gives them a few less chances than maybe some other teams would have. But I don't think this result in a vacuum really does too much. But they're definitely in the just got to keep winning mode and get to those other games, starting with that Michigan game in early February that I think start to become a lot more important.
By the way, I should clarify. Someone asked in our chat. They said Yogi's. Is that right? Yes, that is where our meetup will be happening on the 30th, but not Yogi Ferrell's. I mean, unless Doc, if you're listening, I mean, if you want to host the meetup, that would be awesome. But we are talking about Yogi's, the restaurant in Bloomington. If you're not a native of Bloomington, there is a restaurant there called Yogi's. And really, I mean, again, hey, Zeisloft had a good game, so maybe Nix would have been a little bit more appropriate after a shooting performance like tonight. But I think when you consider that Yogi has been the point guard for this team for 4 out of the 5 years that we've been doing the assembly call, having our first meetup at Yogi's just seems appropriate. And Ryan, let's talk about Yogi a little bit. I mean, again, he passes Quinn Buckner. Just stop right there. Anytime that you say someone passes Quinn Buckner on the all-time Indiana list, that's got to make you stop and say, whoa. And obviously now Michael Lewis is first all-time in assists for Indiana with just a normal game. Yogi should pass him against Illinois. There have been some ups and downs during Yogi's career, but what I love is I feel like we're seeing his best basketball now as he goes into Big Ten play, his senior year. He's more engaged on defense. He's really leading this team offensively. Just talk a little bit about Yogi. Maybe try and put what we're seeing into perspective, because while the wins haven't always been there, the championships haven't been there yet, this is one of the best point guards clearly in the history of IU basketball.
Yeah, I think that's without a doubt. I think he ranks up there with the greatest guys who ever put on that uniform. And yeah, he's had 2 years in there. 2 of his 4 years have been really struggles. One in particular, but you've never questioned him. It's been the guys around him. You've never questioned Yogi on the court. He's a guy we've trusted since he was the starting point guard on the #1 team in the nation as a freshman. I mean, it's amazing what he's done with his career. I think it's gone unappreciated at times because they struggled. The team struggled, his sophomore year, had their struggles at the back end of his junior year. But this is a guy who, as a senior, I mean, it's rare that you get guys who are productive as him staying through their senior year in college basketball anymore. But he's got a chance to break a lot of records and end up really high on a lot of career lists for Indiana, and it's well deserved. He's a hard worker. He's been a hard worker since the day he stepped on campus. He's a guy who I think has this year sort of taken the mantle of leadership and really run with it. And that was a big question in the offseason. Today, and what we're seeing from him that's most important is he's stepping up in close games. You're seeing him sort of take over in close games, and maybe that hasn't happened before. But today, 20 points, 6 rebounds, 7 assists. As you said, past Quinn Buckner, is right up on Michael Lewis's tail for that all-time record. And when you think about where we are in the season, how much time's left, he's going to obliterate that record. And so it's not like he's going to wind up first place and it's going to be, oh, well, he snuck past him there. No, he's going to destroy that record, and that's really a testament to him. And it's a guy who was unselfish and is willing to set other people up and get others involved, while also being a prolific scorer. He's been a prolific scorer throughout his career. So, I mean, and he also, again, we can go on about him forever, and I think that we've talked about at times we kind of overlook him when we're talking about great performances and stuff. But he played 37 minutes today, and it was an afternoon game on the road. You're going to be tired in those games. I mean, we saw a lot of Indiana guys look sluggish today. that's what happens when you tip off at 12:30. I mean, it's not when they're typically ready to play, and so, but he fought through it and made big plays after big play after big play, and that's just who he is, and that's who he's been his entire career, and it's nice that he's finally getting that recognition, and I think, as you guys mentioned earlier, being left off the Wooden Award watch list was just stupid. I mean, he is absolutely one of the top 25. He is right there with the best point guards in the country, and most. If you want to talk about most valuable player to a team nationally, honestly, I can't think of more of 5 players more valuable to their team than Yogi Ferrell.
I'm glad you brought that up because while you were talking, I wanted to ask Andy a question. Much was made about Denzel Valentine and how much he means to Michigan State and how they're the #1 team with him, and they may not even be a top 25 team without him. Don't you think that Yogi is as valuable, if not more, to Indiana than Denzel Valentine? I mean, what is this Indiana team without Yogi?
Well, particularly now with Blackman out, I think that's I don't know. It's probably a far more interesting debate with the healthy Blackman. Today, I don't think there's any question, quite honestly. And I think really just as you look at Big Ten play, and I've cited these a couple times when I've written up the stats, just how many of IU's points during key stretches that he's either scored or assisted on. The amount of minutes that he's playing. Today I'm fairly certain he didn't come out at all in the second half. And I think, with Robert Johnson being kind of up and down, and Zaisloff being, just having I don't want to say a one-dimensional skill set, but so focused on shooting 3-pointers, Yogi just does stuff on this team that nobody else can do. And I think that if you look at how Michigan State played without Valentine, they didn't play the cream of the crop either, and they had a few close calls, but they still managed to win those games. I'm not sure that if facing a similar set of games, or even facing the set of games that IU's faced thus far in Big Ten play, they would have won more than half of them without Yogi, and may not have won any of them, quite frankly. So I definitely think it's a pretty interesting debate, and I don't know what that'll mean come Big Ten Player of the Year voting and all those kinds of things, but I definitely think it's a fair argument, and not a slam dunk for either guy, for sure.
Hey, by the way, quick non sequitur here. I forgot to mention this, but awesome personal moment for me in the second half of the game as IU legend Kirk Haston tweeted at the Assembly Call account a picture of Brian Cardinal and Joey King saying, "Is it time to induct Joey King into the Big Ten Flopping Hall of Fame with this guy?" So, just a kind of a cool moment for an IU fan to experience. So
any chance to rip Brian Cardinal, I'm there. I am right there.
All right, Will, real quick, you've got a stat. Let's get to that, and then Andy, let's look ahead to Illinois.
All right, yeah, coming into the game, Minnesota was last in the conference in 2% two-point shot defense, with giving up 60.5% of those shots. And then even on defense, like effective field goal percentage, they were giving up about 57.6%. And then, we came into the game, mid to high 50s in both of those categories. But we only finished with 47.4% of our two-point shots, with an effective field goal percentage of only 47.6. So I just want to ask you guys, why do you think that's so? Was it just because it's like a weekend game, early tip-off, we're at the barn, or just something that Minnesota's doing defensively that's giving us fits? So any insight you guys have?
Yeah, I think Minnesota's really aggressive defensively. They're also very handsy defensively, but we've been over that. I think that one thing that it is tough to come out at noon at 12:30 and play a game. It really is. You're used to playing night games. You're traveling, you're waking up in a strange bed, and then you're getting up really quickly and playing a game. And that's not your typical the typical schedule for these guys. Usually they have a walkthrough in the afternoon and then play at night. I mean, so it does throw you off. And I think these games almost always are terrible. They're tough to watch. They're slogs almost always. And and Will just mentioned his first week of classes this week too, so there's a lot going on. So I wasn't expecting just a beautiful basketball performance today. Then you throw in the fact that the barn is an absolute. I mean, it's one of those arenas where when it's your arena, you absolutely love it and think it's the greatest thing ever. And when Indiana's not playing there, I love watching games there. Just because it's a disaster. I mean, it's an absolute disaster of an arena. There are barns in Indiana that are more equipped to host a Big Ten basketball game than the barn. But also, the rims aren't. You hear all the time these urban legends about the rims being too small or too high or whatever. And frankly, I believe everything I've heard about the barn. So elevated court, all that stuff. I believe all those stories about the crazy stuff that goes on there. So I'm not too worried about them having a cold shooting night. I did think Minnesota came out locked in defensively, very aggressive, out on shooters, not giving much room, and Indiana worked through it, found open shots, open driving lanes, but it took a while. And so Indiana got much better looks in the second half, not from three necessarily, but just at the hoop, more driving lanes, things like that. Zyslov's threes, I think helped open the floor up. But it's funny, Zyslov was so quiet in the second half. I said earlier I didn't think he played that much. He played 29 minutes, which was second on the team. But Minnesota was able to neutralize him, and that's probably why we didn't notice him as much. But yeah, I'm not that worried about the performance because they came away with the win in the end, and they're capable of so much more.
Yep, I agree with you. So Andy, we're going to go to you for a quick preview of Indiana's next game against Illinois. I just want to point this out because the stats are updated. In Big Ten Conference games only, Indiana is giving up .926 points per possession. That is first in the Big Ten Conference. And I know that our schedule has not been good, but this Indiana team that last year was sub-200 in defense, one of the worst defenses we've ever seen, is first in the Big Ten in points per possession. That's remarkable. And if you look at Indiana's season-long statistics now, according to Ken Palm, because the numbers are now updated, the Hoosiers are all the way up to, I believe, 61st in defense, 62nd in adjusted defensive efficiency. The Hoosiers are now down to 22nd in offensive efficiency. So the big question, Andy, if the trends continue, how soon will it be before this team's defense is better than its offense? Or are we there already?
I don't think we have that many games left to quite get to that point. It could, I suppose, if the season lasted into June, but definitely a positive trend to see, that's for sure.
So let's talk Illinois. What's in that game? Is that Tuesday or Wednesday? Tuesday, the 19th.
Yeah, it's Tuesday. I'll actually be there. So I'm taking my dad as part of a Christmas gift to him. So I'll be at the game. So God forbid the 10-game losing streak is broken when I'm there. But hashtag no jinx, right? That's
right.
Is that what we're supposed to do?
Go.
All right, got
Good.
it. All right, taken care of. So Illinois is interesting. They've had a lot of injuries. I was watching a little bit of their game. Now they're playing Nebraska after IU. Of their 29 field goal attempts in the first half, 20 of them came from three-point range, which feels like a lot. So that's a little bit. I mean, they shoot a decent amount of threes, but even that's pretty out of character as you would expect. But they shoot, best from three-point range. They don't get a lot of offensive rebounds. They don't get to the free throw line a lot. The one thing they do really well is not turn the ball over. So that'll be interesting for looking at some of IU's numbers where they've actually been pretty strong at turning the ball over. I know you and Alex talked about that on the podcast on the Brink this week. So they've got a couple guys that are good players that score a lot of their points, and but they really want to try to space the floor. They are going to shoot some threes. So I think pose a little bit different threat. Their defense has been they're currently ranked 164th on the Pomeroy side. Most of their issues really are shooting. They haven't put teams on the line, but they're 312th in effective field goal percentage defense. If you use Pomeroy a lot of their numbers for 3-point shooting, 2-point shooting are all in some shade of pink, which is not good. So that's really where ideally IU will be able to get some work done there. They haven't given up a ton of offensive rebounds. I thought early today that was an area we had talked about with IU doing really well. And they didn't do a lot in the first half, but I thought the second half they got a lot of timely offensive rebounds. So that'll be another key. And really outside of Illinois beating Purdue at home last weekend, they haven't really looked very good at all. Don't have a lot of quality wins. Again, I think the injuries have played a role in that. So definitely feels like a game on the road that IU should. On the road for Illinois that IU should be able to handle just based on kind of how the numbers shake out. So the guys to really watch for them are Malcolm Hill and Kendrick Nunn. I thought Michael and Josh both talked a decent amount about the Illinois game. So if anybody missed that, I would encourage everybody to go back to the midweek show that those guys did, and they talked a bit about them as well. So they've got kind of a weird mix, a lot a lot of freshmen and a lot of juniors. So an interesting mix of players there. But in general, they haven't played very well this year, and injuries have played a big role. I think forcing guys to play more than they expected and into different roles than they expected.
So the Twitter account at Big Ten Geeks just tweeted, Illinois season is basically basketball experiments now. What would happen if we shot 53s? So, although, and I do like Big Ten Geeks, but take it with a little bit of a grain of salt because their first comment after Blackman got hurt was that Indiana would really miss him defensively, and that hasn't proven true. So with that said, a quick reminder one more time to sign up for the email list, assemblycall.com/subscribe. Text Indiana to 44144. And also, if you are watching live right now, Will has reminded me of this, and I appreciate you for reminding me, Will. Make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. And even if you're listening on the podcast, you can go to assemblycall.com/YouTube. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. What's great about that is that when the show goes live, as soon as the game ends, or even the halftime report, you'll get an alert on your phone. So instead of navigating to the site, you just open up that alert, and it will take you right to the show. So it's really convenient. So that's assemblycall.com/YouTube for watching or listening to the show live right after the game. All right, this is the Assembly Call. I am Jared Morris here with my co-host. We are talking about and breaking down Indiana's 70-63 win over Minnesota today. The consensus: Indiana toughed out a win. They grinded out a road win. We get out of the barn alive, which is huge. Now we end the show, as we always do, with our picks for Indiana's next game. And then we'll go to last call. Make sure that you participate in our Assembly Call Picks Challenge. Go to assemblycall.com/picks to get your pick in for IU Illinois. So far this season, all of us have perfect records except for Ryan after his unfortunate pick of Rutgers for the Big Ten opener. But we'll go to you.
Total crap! I emailed you my pick of IU. I am doing picks for the rest of the year under protest.
Okay, what's your first pick under protest for IU Illinois?
IU's going to beat Illinois. That's at home. They'll beat Illinois.
All right.
No question.
Andy?
Yeah, I'm picking IU again. You guys tried to set me up and let Titus make my pick, but since he's a solid guy, he took IU in this game after the game last Sunday. So I'm still good. Unfortunately, Ryan, you were unable to secure a proper stand-in for your pick. Right. So that's how it works sometimes.
Hey, you know what? I was visiting family. Every time you go visit family, we're fine with it. I gotta coach my daughter's soccer game or whatever, and we're fine with it. We just do. When I go out of town to do some family, on the rare occasion I get to see my family, I get crapped on here. What is this?
And Will, your pick.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and go with IU in their 11th straight. 11's my lucky number. It's Farrell's number, so I'm going to go with that. # no jinx.
I am picking Indiana. The Hoosiers will win. All right, let's go to last call. Final comments on this IU victory. Ryan, we will allow you to speak first.
First of all, I want to get into this picks thing. No, I'm just kidding. I think, as we mentioned all day, this was Yogi Ferrell's game. It was a showcase for him. You feel great for him stepping up on a big stage. I know it's Minnesota, but he played really well, especially after the snub from the Wooden Award people. And the guy just continues to prove how great he is, and he is one of the all-time great IU players. I think that you look at guys who he came in that were playing with him, and guys like Cody Zeller, Victor Oladipo. I mean, those are both considered great Hoosiers, but they never set the records that he has and things like that because they didn't stick around all 4 years. And he is really just assaulting the IU record books, and he deserves everything he's gotten. I've said this several times. He's a hard worker. He's a kid who was stuck with Indiana through some rough times, and he's taken heat from fans at times. But you know what? He just kept playing his game, just kept going after it, and he's a good kid. He's got a great mom who we're all friends with, and so you feel great for the family, you feel great for him, and I'm really excited to see him break that record, and I think we can all agree it's probably going to come against Illinois, and it'll be a great moment for not only Yogi and the Farrell family, but also for Indiana basketball.
Yep, absolutely. Well said, Ryan. Will, last call.
Well, you know what? Thinking about it, like I brought up earlier and Ryan kind of mentioned, first week of class, it's Saturday. I'm feeling tired. I bet these players were too. I wanted to sleep in, but hey, I got up and we're here. But I'm sure they had a little bit of grogginess to them and took them a while to wake up a little bit. So, again, it's just good to get the win at the barn. I'm looking forward to the next game, and I'm going to steal that quote that you talked about from Max here. This is a quote from Max on Zysoft. He said, "He was like our defibrillator. We had an irregular heartbeat. He hit those big ones, got us going."
Well said. Last call, Andy.
Well, I think I'm going to let Ryan's comment go that Yogi has a great mom. That was dangerously close to like Stephen Bardo territory there, where we all, kind of heard that. But I know that it was meant in a completely different way than it would have been meant had Stephen Bardo said it. So, Ryan, we do echo your comments. But
That's fair. That's fair.
I know your intentions were different than his, so you can get by with that. He certainly could not. At any rate, no, I just, I continue to kind of focus on this when I wrote the stats in the Ohio State game, kind of the resilience that this team has shown, and I think part of that is shown by different guys picking up the slack, and that's why I like that quote from Max that, they needed a lift and somebody picked him up, and it hasn't always been the same guy, as we talked about earlier. It's been OG so often lately that's provided that spark, and Max in the Rutgers game, and it was great to see Nick come in and do that, given how much he'd been struggling. I think everybody had the same thought after the Ohio State game. It was like, well, there's only one bad thing that came out of the Ohio State game, and it was really, how much he was struggling. And so, kind of shows some of that resiliency again for this team. And after a pretty rough start, they won 10 games in a row. And while we can, kind of sit around and argue the competition level, which it appears some Purdue fans have been doing with our friends at Crimson Quarry while we've been on here on Twitter. We could certainly do that, but these are some games that this team probably wouldn't have won last year and maybe even earlier this year. So, again, I think they continue to come together. The defense didn't really slip today. I thought, aside from getting called for a ton of fouls, played really well. And so, that's the development I think everybody's most excited about as we've gone forward. So I think just another example of what we've come to see from this team, and hopefully a more impressive win against Illinois is coming on Tuesday night. But this was a win nonetheless, and I think somebody said this was only the third time in the last decade or so, maybe the last 10 games or so, that IU's been to the barn and got a win. So I could be butchering that stat, but it certainly doesn't feel like there have been a lot of wins. So no matter how ugly it may have been, it looks pretty in the win column, and we move on undefeated in Big Ten play.
Boy, it sure does. And when you go into the barn, no matter how bad the opposition is, you just want to get out of there with a victory. And I don't know if other fan bases feel the same way about the barn that Indiana does, but there's just something about our teams. I mean, the vaunted 2013 team with Oladipo and Zeller and all those guys went into the barn and lost. And granted, that was a much better Minnesota team, but, dating all the way back to my childhood, watching the post-Calbert Chaney Hoosiers go in there in '94 and lose by 50. It was a Vashawn Leonard Minnesota team, but still, a good Minnesota team. But that Indiana team had 3 all-time greats on it: Damon Bailey, Brian Evans, and Allen Henderson, and they got beat by 50 at the barn. Weird things happen at the barn. Today started out weird. The whole game felt a little bit strange. But, and Seth Davis, said this on Twitter. Indiana was out of sync, out of sorts, and they found a way to grind out a victory, and that's what good teams do. And that is what good teams do on the road. We talked before the season started about how poor Indiana had been on the road in Big Ten play, not just against good teams, but against any teams outside of the 2012-2013 season. And all they've done to open up Big Ten play is go 5-0 with 3 wins on the road. Are the 3 wins against teams in the bottom half of the Big Ten? Yes, but they're road wins. And the Hoosiers have won 10 in a row. They're 5-0 in the conference. They've got some confidence. Their senior leader is doing exactly what their senior leader needs to do, and enough guys are stepping up in every game. It's not the same guys every game, but it's enough guys stepping up that Indiana just keeps winning. And so I know people have been talking about whether, this early season schedule, the soft early season schedule is a detriment. To me, I think the soft early season schedule came at exactly the right time for this team, given the context. Because with Blackman out and with the team struggling a little bit, really having to come back at the end against Notre Dame, but playing poorly for 34 minutes of that game, and then, not putting a good performance together against Kennesaw State. Just think back to 5 games ago and how just, not solid the footing felt that Indiana was on. And now we're sitting here 5 games later, and the Hoosiers are 5-0. And I think the fact that Indiana's been able to build some confidence, let some guys settle into some new roles, has really been big. And we won't know for sure how good this Indiana team is until the schedule stiffens and the good teams come in the second half of Big Ten play. But I think the fact that our guys are getting this chance to build some confidence, get some wins at the same time, are going to put us in a position to be much more ready for those games, hopefully, than we were last year, because this team started out 5-1 in conference play last year, went 4-8 from that point forward. They weren't ready for when the season hit prime time. We don't know if this team is ready, but it sure feels more sustainable right now than the start felt last year, because it starts with defense. Indiana's offense wasn't there today for most of the game, but the defense was, and that's why your Hoosiers are currently leading the Big Ten in points per possession given up. That number surely will go up as the competition gets better. But for now, the formula is working. The Hoosiers are playing better, playing together, and they're 5-0, 10 games in a row. We'll see if they can keep that going on Tuesday against Illinois, win or lose, hopefully win, expectedly win. We will be here to break it all down for you on the Assembly Call after the game, and we hope you will join us. So until then, have a great rest of your weekend. Enjoy some NFL football, and we will talk to you Tuesday night after IU Illinois. Take care, everybody.